The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show with me, Charles Christian, as once again we take our weekly dive into the world of weirdness, folklore, urban myths, geek culture and the paranormal. This time around we're looking at the world of prepping, preparing for those disasters, natural or man-made, sometimes a bit of both, that we hope will never happen. We are lucky to be joined, talking from the top of a mountain in New Mexico, by our guest Thomas Gomez. Thomas is head of research at the dotcom, which is an excellent resource for everything you could ever possibly want to know about prepping. As head of research, Thomas is responsible for researching, writing and sourcing the various guides and reviews the website carries. Here's the interview. It's my great pleasure to be talking to Thomas Gomez, who is the head of research for The Prepared. Now, Thomas, good to speak to you.
Good chatting with you.
Before we go any further, tell us a bit about The Prepared for people who aren't familiar with it, what it is, where you can find it.
Okay, so it's theprepared.com, and The Prepared was started by a gentleman named John Ramey in late 2017 as kind of a side project. John has been prepping his entire adult life and was constantly getting emails from his colleagues in the tech industry asking about prepping for specific scenarios. So he started a blog. This was the easiest way to get this knowledge out there, was start a blog and get this stuff written down. Well, in 2018, this turned into a full-time job where John brought in two other partners, and we'll talk about those guys. But a few words about John, fascinating guy. He is a very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur. Like I said, brilliant guy. And aside from starting a handful of very successful businesses in the tech industry, he has advised the White House and the U.S. Department of Defense on emerging technology. And he was one of the original plank owners of the Defense Innovation Unit, which was set up to help the U.S. military adopt emerging technology. So essentially it was a bridge between the Department of Defense and the tech industry. So in 2018, John brought in two guys, John Stokes and Tom Rader. And John Stokes is one of the founders of Ars Technica, which is a technology news site that John started in 1998. And then he sold that to Condé Nast in 2008.
Yeah.
It's still a great site. I love Ars Technica. John Stokes, like John Ramey, is a very intelligent human. And both these guys are great at seeing trends and predicting what's going to be the next big crisis.
Yeah.
So, and then the third guy was Tom Rader, who was a Navy corpsman in the U.S. Navy, who deployed with a reconnaissance Marine unit to Iraq early in the global war on terror. And Tom, like John, and the two Johns, the Stokes and the Ramey, has a very diverse skill set. Before The Prepared, he was the editor of the Firearm blog, which is the #1 firearm blog in the world. Mm-hmm. And then before that, he was a developmental analyst and software developer in the healthcare industry. Right. And like John, he is an entrepreneur. So a lot of talent there. So these guys, they 2018, they started, the site started growing, experiencing steady growth. And then, late 2019, COVID started popping up on people's radar, and The Prepared started to cover it. And then they started to hire experts from healthcare industry, the medical field, and producing specific content about COVID. We had roundups, we had key developments. We were the first to really talk about supply chain and food shortages. We even had a guide that told people exactly how to go shop for food safely. Mm-hmm. Or how to go out. So we were kind of we kind of caught that early, and we started seeing it early.
Yeah, that's very early in the time scales. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so that's kind of how it got started. Excuse me. I mean, we're still growing like crazy and still cranking out good content. We knew, we caught COVID was kind of a black swan event for us, and we covered it. We're still covering it, but it never, distracted from the mission, which was, creating, general preparedness guidelines and reviews for people. Because, there's biological stuff, there's viruses, there's COVID. That's one very small slice of the overall preparedness pie. So, but so that's the website. The mission of the website, it's simple. It's just to help people survive emergencies. And that can be everyday stuff like power outages or car accidents or even, natural disasters or worst case, like societal collapse.
Now, that's what one of the questions I was going to ask you next was the idea of prepping. It seems to have shifted recently because a few years ago, it all was very much survivalists preparing bunkers in the desert for when society collapsed or when the zombies took over, and was seen as very much a little bit on the weird out there scene. Whereas, as you mentioned, COVID has been one factor here in the UK. We also had Brexit and concerns, and still ongoing concerns about supply chain issues.
Yes.
And that suddenly the nice, comfy world we were all living in 2018 may have gone and possibly may have gone forever. And it seems to be that its appeal is now spreading to a far wider range of people. And it's now prepping is almost a bit like insurance against your house burning down. You hope your house doesn't burn down, but it's a good thing to have insurance in case it does. And if the supply chain breaks down, again, you hope it doesn't. But again, it makes sense if you do. Would that be a right perspective that there's been a demographic change? I would
agree 100%.
Yeah.
Initially 20 years ago, I'd say preppers they had the stigma of maybe radical political beliefs or xenophobia. But regardless of political ideology, gender, race, et cetera, everyone should be prepping. And I think we've really seen the last 20 years with, here in the United States, we have hurricanes in the southeast part of the state, or the southeast part of the country. We have a lot of wildfire in the west. Mm-hmm. And, whether that's being amplified due to climate change or it's just more human beings living, concentrated areas or in areas maybe they shouldn't be living because maybe like part of the ecology is fire but regardless, we're having, a lot more natural disasters. And what people are realizing is the government, whether that's state, local, federal, is not very efficient at dealing with this, or in some cases they don't have the resources to actually get in there and help people out. So you're really on your own. And we can talk about like just basic stuff you can do. But granted, there's certain parts of the U.S. that are fairly safe, but other parts where they're just real disaster prone. You should be prepping. So, that stigma is definitely gone. And in media, there was, History Channel used to have like a prepper show, and it was like a bunch of bumbling idiots, in my opinion, who wouldn't last a day. Honestly, they wouldn't last a day. But I think there's a lot of people that are just rational, regardless of whatever your ideology or how you see the world. It's like, we're kind of on our own. We should probably have 2 weeks worth of food at a minimum and water. And, we'll get into what you need. But I would definitely say which is good. I think it's great. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what are the sort of drivers? What are the things then? You've mentioned natural disasters, flooding, fire and things like that. What other factors are driving people towards prepping then?
I think people are also seeing, the institutions set up after World War II are kind of failing. Like here in the U.S., our government, probably for the last 20 to 30 years, the people in charge of solving problems are not really solving problems. Mm-hmm. And then maybe that's the bureaucracy or that's just the polarization, political landscape. But, that's happening. That's a slow burn, if you will. It's slowly happening. There's other factors that keep me up at night. Like I can predict that because you kind of see which way the political winds are going to blow in this country and where the money's going to be shifted around. But what scares me is stuff like we can't control, like earthquakes. You can't really control an earthquake. You can't control events like Tunguska or asteroid impact. Like we maybe we can track that, but how do you deal with that if it hits and it shuts, and it causes chaos in a country for several years because it's affecting the weather? Or, here's, I pulled two historical examples that I love to cite. In the South Pacific, you had in 1815 the Timbora explosion, and you had in 1883 the Krakatoa explosion. Timbora put out, between 10 to 120 million tons of sulfur in the stratosphere, which affected the climate all over the world. So that was something that was felt in the South Pacific, but everybody in the northern hemisphere had extreme weather. Even so, that was in 1815 and 1816. That became known as the year without summer.
Yes.
And so average global temperature decreased, 0.4 to 0.7 Celsius. For the Americans, that's 0.7 to 1.3 Fahrenheit, which isn't a lot to me, but it was enough to, really, affect weather. Where, in New England, Eastern Canada, the Mid-Atlantic, snow fell in June, crops were destroyed in the Northern Hemisphere, or they simply didn't grow.
Yeah.
So that was, we couldn't do anything about that. That just happened. Right. Yeah. But by 1817, the price of wheat, barley, rye, oats rose dramatically. That actually led to societal unrest all over Europe and a migrant crisis all over Europe. So, which is history just loves to repeat itself because you have migrants moving all over the place. So this amplified. There was, I think, a typhus epidemic in Southern Europe from 1816 to 1820-ish, and that made it worse because you had people looking for work, looking for food. So, so it's like one little thing that we had no control over was just the catalyst for social unrest and a pandemic and, mass starvation. So how do you prepare for that? Because we know that's going to happen again. We know, there's potentially volcanoes in the South Pacific in Iceland that could go off and affect weather. So we know for a few years, if you're storing food and water and, you're kind of ready to live off the grid for a few years and be very uncomfortable, but you'll survive. It's not hard to plan for that. And it's really not that expensive either.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is an EMP burst from the sun, like a Tunguska type incident or, a volcano cooking off in the South Pacific. That's what keeps me up at night personally. So
yes.
I can predict, the politics of my country. I can see what's kind of coming down the pipe. We can see superpowers rising and falling in the world, but and we kind of have control over that. You can tell people why, hey, this is a bad policy, or your government can hopefully take steps to check the power of maybe of a bad actor or a country that's acting selfish. And maybe that's our country, maybe that's my country, not throwing stones, but there's stuff we just can't control, and that's the stuff we really should prepare for.
Yeah. You mentioned MEPs coming off the sun. That's basically the risk there, as it knocks out satellite communications. And
potentially our grid.
And the electrical grid as well.
Yes, potentially, yeah.
Right. And obviously that means the internet, everything we rely on.
Yeah, that's water. I mean, like if you have a well, like I have a well at my house up in the mountains, and that requires electricity to pull that water out of the ground.
Yeah.
So I have a plan to get the water out. It's slow, it's inefficient, but I do have a plan. We look at Texas. Texas had a polar vortex. And it shut down Texas. I mean, Texas was a 100-year storm for Texas, and Texas wasn't really ready for it. You had the power went down, and then you had an ongoing crazy snowstorm. So transportation was hampered. People were relying on electric heaters. Well, now there's no electricity, so you don't have an electric heater. So people were, they were obviously getting cold. People that had like electric stoves couldn't cook or boil water. If the grid's down, your pump's down, there's no running water, sanitation becomes an issue, hygiene becomes an issue. Going out to buy stuff. Normally, if you're constantly buying food or going out to buy water, all of a sudden you're not prepped. You have no way to, cook it or even maybe you don't even have it. Maybe you don't have zero water. You're melting snow if you can do that. So electric grid, and it's been talked about. I know there's a lot of smart people in this country have talked about how our grid is it wouldn't be ready for a certain event like that. So
And on the subject of volcanoes, we had that incident, what was it, about 10 years ago now, where a volcano went off in Iceland and it disrupted transatlantic air travel because just little things. You think, how can this do it? But suddenly everything grinds to a halt.
Yeah. And then say you're diverting planes over a certain airspace and maybe it's not a safe area. So it just, logistically, everything just becomes kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, now moving on, when you're planning your, for want of a better word, your prepping priorities, there's obviously, I suppose, short-term issues, mid-term, and maybe longer-term, isn't there? I mean, short-term is what if there is prolonged power cut, as in 24 hours or something.
Yeah.
And then what if it runs to a week? And then the longer-term, what if it is going to run for months or longer? How do you set about sort of prioritizing what to do with something like that?
Well, so we have, you have obviously, like you said, in the old days, so we'll just talk about, let's talk about the mindset real quick. So what's unique about the prepared is we're apolitical. We kind of stay right in the middle and we follow what's called the sane prepper rules. So, I'll read off a few little, some notes here, but, data and reason should guide your planning. Just use data. What are the issues that could affect you in your region? Because we're all a little different. So data and reason, that should always guide your planning. Know that you're not going to be 100% prepared for 100% of the scenarios you may face. Right? So it's impossible. Good preparation, it's a mix of gear, supplies, skills, practice, planning, community, and the most important to me is mindset. So everything I'm reading off is obviously on the website. On the website, if you go to the prepared and you go up to the upper left corner, there is a little tab that says Start Prepping. We have 4 great articles right there. So everything I'm talking about today can essentially be found in those 4 articles there. Right. So because I'm going to be rattling off a lot of lists. But it's going to be a lot. I don't expect people to be taking notes right now. But, so if you just go to theprepared.com and you go to the Start Prepping tab, there's 4 great articles there that will literally have everything I'm going to discuss today. And the prepared, it's like a curated wiki, if you will. So articles will say, you're going to need a lighters, a headlamp, a heater, a generator. Every one of those links will have a link to an actual review that we did on headlamps or water purification or generators. So, and then we go way down the rabbit hole in each of those, various products. But back to the sane prepper models, which really guides how we write, if you will.
Yeah.
Let me grab my notes here. So let's see here. So mindset. So going back, data and reason should guide your planning. Know that you're not going to be 100% prepared for the 100% of the scenarios you will face. Preparation is a mix of gear, supplies, skills, practice, planning, community, and mindset. We're big on focusing on concepts that you can adapt quickly versus just like, okay, if this happens, then here's a list of 20 things you need to do. That's unless you have like a reference guide, that's just not.
Yeah,
that's not feasible for most. It's more concepts. Okay, water. I need water. Okay, where can we get the water? Is it clean? How do we clean it? How much water are we going to need today? We need to move. So how do we take the water? That's just a concept of water. It's an example. Mm-hmm. Another thing, prepping doesn't have to be expensive, and you definitely shouldn't go into debt prepping. And prepping should not really dominate your life. It's not. I mean, there's people that just take this way too far, and it becomes their whole life, and they spend their whole life in a bunker waiting for some event to happen that never happens, and they really miss out on the quality of their life and their community. So, should not dominate your life.
Yeah. But
prepping, just in general, first priority is having 2 weeks worth of food and water in your home. And there's a reason for that. In the old days, they would say 72 hours is what you needed. But what we're seeing now with wildfires and these cold snaps and hurricanes, it takes about 9 to 14 days for help to arrive, if you will. Or for, like in Texas, they were down for about 2 weeks before everything kind of came back. When you look at some of the recent hurricanes in the U.S., 2 to 4 weeks you're down before they get FEMA in there. And I mean, this last one in Texas, I think it took a week for the government to declare an emergency and get FEMA in there. So to me, that's a week too long. It should have been done right away. But But yeah, so right away, everybody should have, 2 weeks worth of water, 2 weeks worth of food. You'll need to think about the ways to stay warm or cool, right? Because you can heat stroke as well.
Mm-hmm.
You'll need a way to treat your water, and you'll need to think about a heat source for cooking and cooking your food and boiling water. So that's the bare minimum, 2 weeks. For water, people typically consume about 2 gallons of water per day, 1 gallon for just drinking and food prep, and 1 gallon for just basic sanitation, sponge baths, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Food, just assume everyone in your house is on a 2,000 calorie diet and plan accordingly. Food, there's a lot of great foods out there that last, 20 years. Freeze-dried foods, beans, rice, those will all last 20 years if stored properly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not hard. That's not that hard. And we have a lot of food lists on the site. We literally tell you exactly like what to buy, and we can go into that if you want. But yeah, that's the basic right there. So 2 weeks worth of water, 2 weeks worth of food. Think about how to stay warm or cool. So thermoregulate, a way to treat your water, and some type of heat source for cooking and boiling water. That's it. That's really it.
Mm.
Great place to start.
Yeah. So 2 weeks, yes, because I think one of the things would throw a lot of people is the cooking for 2 weeks if we're assuming there's no electricity, because you're then down to, I suppose for most people, bottled gas, aren't you? And if you're using it for heating and for cooking, you're going to get through it quite quickly.
Yes.
And certainly those little small canisters you get in little camping stoves that, they're not going to last you at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's other, like if you live in like a wooded area, like I live in a forest, so there's plenty of natural, cellulose, wood to burn to get heat. And I have a little stove, so I also have a wood stove in my home just in case. We have central heat, so it's propane forced heat, just in case. But our main heat source is wood. So we have a lot of wood on the property, and we cut it down, and we burn it.
Yes.
But we could bake in there, we could grill in there. When I'm too late, sometimes in the middle of a snowstorm, I'm too lazy to go out and cook on my Barbie out on the deck. So I'll literally just throw a couple fire bricks in a grill, a little grate in my wood stove, and just throw the steaks in there and cook them real quick, right? So it works great. I've made pizza in there, made bread in there, so there's it's awesome. You could boil water on top of that thing, for tea. I like coffee. My wife loves tea, so she's a kind of a tea snob. So but yeah, so you think about how you're going to heat the food or cook it. Searing meat's easy, toasting bread's easy.
Yeah.
Boiling water for, ramen noodles is easy, but like beans and rice, you have to cook that stuff longer.
Yes.
So do you have enough fuel to cook that to where it's, to actually get it cooked,
yes.
which will help, in absorption, nutrients, and digestion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff people don't really think about. They just assume they're going to go to the tap. There's hot water. They're going to have, the gas, like after an earthquake, you really shouldn't be, if you have a gas stove, I'd evacuate the area, because you may have gas leaks. You may have, natural gas leaks that if anybody, if there's a spark, the whole area
this is if you've got gas as your normal heating, and it's, through the gas mains, the pipework. Yeah, I can see that. See that. What about the water side of things? Because you mentioned you've got a well, and I think that would throw a lot of people, because it tends to be when there's an issue, you stock up at the supermarket on bottled water. But of course, that quickly runs out.
Yes.
And as you say, you're using 2 gallons per person. That's a lot. Yeah.
It is. And, the little water bottles you get, that plastic they use is not really made for long-term storage.
Yes.
So we have several articles written about this, but your best bet is a plastic container, anywhere from 10 gallons to, I have a 55 gallon in my garage, all the way up to 1,000 gallon tank. That's made out of virgin food grade high density polyethylene. And that's usually like a blue container, and water can last in there for years, like 20, 30 years. So, on hand, we have 55 gallons of water on hand right now. And I put a few drops of water preserver. Essentially, it's bleach, unscented bleach. You drop it in there and you shut it, and then the water is sterile.
Right.
So we always have water. Now, our well just went down. It was down for a week. And so we elected to just go to the store. I didn't want to tap that yet because it's not really an emergency. And the store is a minute away, so I could just run down to a local convenience store and grab a few gallons of water for us to tea and coffee and cooking. But you know what, we do have, let's see. So I did, which is great. I installed a rain gutter system here. And we have on hand, so 5 50-gallon buckets.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So at any given time, it's 250 gallons of water. And, granted the birds poop on the roof and, that flushes into so that water's pretty I wouldn't drink that water, but I could easily boil it. I could treat it with like bleach. I could treat it with, iodine. I could purify it through a filter. Mm-hmm. So that's easy. What we use that water for, so we have our well and we're hooked up to, so it's one well that's hooked up to 2 houses, so us and our neighbor. Mm-hmm. And we both have little kids and we both have a spouse that's pregnant. And so sanitation's huge. So toilets have to get flushed, period. Yeah. So we were both drawing from that water to keep our toilets flushing. And that was great. We used about 70 gallons of water in a day, and it just snowed, and then now all my tanks are filled up again. So really, I think we weren't at full capacity for maybe a week before our tanks were full again. But it was great. That was great, just being able to go out there, tap those things, and fill up the toilet bowl and flush. So, but easily, it would have taken me 10 minutes to purify that water if we needed to actually drink it or, use it for cooking. So, but water is the easiest thing people can do. Water is a piece of cake. You can buy a 55-gallon drum from anywhere from $60 to $100, fill it up. You don't have to treat it. You can just leave it in your garage as is, or put a few drops of bleach or water preserver and just shut it and forget about it. If you do that, though, one little caveat is raise it off the ground with a piece of wood or something. If you put it on concrete, plastic loves to leach in, chemicals from concrete. So it could contaminate your water. So just a little word of the wise is build it up on a plank of some sort with like wood. But that's the easiest prep. Just have, if there's 2 people in the house, you need 4 gallons a day. If you need, 2 weeks worth, that's, do the math. It's not a lot of water. That's the number one right there. Have water, and a way to boil it and treat it. Piece of cake. Mm-hmm. So food is, 2 weeks worth of food. That's, like you can go, like you need water 3 days. It's 3 days of that, water, and you're going to die. So water is priority. Food, I know I'm carrying around, I'm not obese, but I'm a little overweight. I know I have, about a month worth of calories on my body if necessary, right? Just full disclosure here, but it's not hard to go, get a bag of rice and a bag of beans, and, you could forage for some vitamin C. Vitamin C is bioavailable. It's everywhere. There's the ponderosa pine tree out here has vitamin C. I can make a tea to get my vitamin C. Meat, jerky lasts about a year to 2 years. Canned meat. It's not hard. Like, this stuff is not hard. So, so that's the short term. Actually, after that, we talk about, we have a great article on this, but the first priority is just having 2 weeks worth of food and water in your home.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian. Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints, 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
The next thing we talk about, though, is improving your financial health and your personal health. Because, going back to the same prepper rules, what's going to create hardship for people, especially like Americans, is like, we'll just cite my own country. 50% of Americans can't handle a $500 emergency without having to use a credit card.
Right.
Right. And a lot of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. So this going back to the well, I'm going to keep citing my well because it just happened. But that well, as soon as we bought this property up here in the woods, we knew that, the most expensive thing to keep, the biggest liability was that well. That at a minimum, we had to keep at least $10,000 in cash on hand to fix that well, because that's roughly what it would cost to replace the whole system.
Yeah.
So my spouse and I would just regularly contribute to that little rainy day fund. It was the well fund, and we never touched it. And then, after 10 years, there was about $10,000 and they're just sitting there.
Yeah.
We're like, great. And then when this well went down, it was $7,000 to tear the whole system out and redo it. So we didn't feel that hardship. It's like it didn't even happen. It was more just an inconvenience not having water in the house.
Yeah.
So, and we learned a lot of lessons. I learned a lot of lessons from the well being down for a week. I have a list. We can talk about that a little later. But financial health is understanding like, okay, I live this lifestyle. I own this technology. This technology is going to break. And it will be a huge financial burden if I'm not prepared for that. So financial health, establish a rainy day fund, get out of credit card debt. I mean, there's healthy debt like a mortgage, and then there's terrible debt like credit card.
Yeah.
And start putting money into your retirement. That's what I would do right there. Establish a rainy day fund for worst case scenario type stuff. Get out of your credit card debt immediately if you can, and start putting money into retirement. And then after that, worry about your personal health. So surviving, bugging out, bugging in, is a lot easier if you're a little bit more on the healthy side versus the not healthy side.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back, 2 weeks of food, water. Then below that, worry about your financial health and your personal health. And then for midterm, start prepping for 6 months to a year. So now we're talking about 6 months worth of water, 6 months worth of food, and thinking about trying to run your home off grid if necessary, if you can, and of course cooking. And there's a lot more. We have huge lists of what you should be, like medical supplies and hygiene, communication tools, documents, ability to light fire, lights. So we have awesome lists on the website already, but so 2 weeks food, water, and then worry about your financial health after you've done that 2 week prep, and then start thinking of scaling up your 2 week preps to 6 months to a year. And that ties in nicely to what we were talking about with volcanoes. Like if a volcano, hampers food supply for a year, you may be living off your food stores or supplementing, let's say you go forage in the woods or try to hunt, although hunting's not a good strategy. Game is very quickly decimated. But 6 months to a year and longer, if society is truly collapsing, we're going to have to go back to almost like an agrarian society where we're homesteading and we're planting gardens and we're raising hogs again and chickens and trying to supplement our food stores with things that we can scavenge or 2 degree hunt, small critters, varmints, stuff like that. But I don't. The site itself hasn't really gotten into the homesteading yet because there's just other threats that are more pressing versus, okay, the world is burned to the ground and we have to rebuild. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Not really rational. What's more rational is you have a 2 week emergency. Let's prepare for that. Let's prepare for, financial planning and getting you back into shape or being healthy. And then worst case scenario is something like 6 months to a year where, a volcano or a non-terrestrial event happens where there is just a global food shortage and the world, you're just going to have to deal with that.
What about some elementary mistakes that people would overlook? I mean, the one I'd spotted on your site was the fact of having all the canned goods but forgetting a can opener, or the fact that you have an electric can opener, as a lot of people does. And, you're stuck on there.
Classic can opener,
I mean, there's some intriguing videos there on how to open cans without using a can opener, which are quite fascinating. Apart from that, what other things are sort of elementary, schoolboy errors that people can make? There's an over-reliance on technology. Well, let's talk like a little bit about food first. The classic can opener, like you just mentioned,
People don't buy calorically dense foods. Maybe they prep the wrong foods. So great food. Let's just talk about what kind of foods people should be prepping or should be getting into. When it comes to just food types, grains are great. They last forever. Beans and legumes can last, 15 to 20 years. Mm-hmm. Fats can last 1 to 2 years, like lard, peanut butter, shortening, oil. Olive oil has a great shelf life, maybe 1 to 2 years. Meat and protein, canned meats will last years. Dry cured meats like country hams and dry cured bacon can last years and years and years. Spices are great to have. Honey is great to have. Honey can, I think they opened up in Egypt, they opened up a mummy and there was crystallized honey in there that was still good. So, 4,000 years in the ground-ish, somewhere in there. But that was still good. You could use that honey. And cheese, a big, waxed Gouda can last 25 years. So it's not hard. Getting that food is all readily available: rice, beans, meat, like cans. Going back to your can question, how long do cans last? In theory, indefinitely, as long as they're not bloating or they're not damaged. The food it may look a little off color. It may not taste rancid, but in theory, if it's prepped right, it can last years and years. So this is the foods people should have. Where people go wrong is they buy the wrong food. Like brown rice still has its germ layers, so it only lasts 6 months to a year.
Right.
Whole wheat flour has a lot of fat in it, so it's going to go rancid. Beef jerky will only last 1 year to 2 years. If it's got a little bit of like fat inside of it, fat goes rancid right away. So granola is great hiking food, but it only lasts about 6 months. And then nuts, limited shelf life because they have a pretty high fat content. So when it comes to food, what people do wrong is they don't buy calorically dense foods, or they don't store it properly, or they get foods that are difficult to cook.
Yeah.
Right. So ideally, your best, freeze-dried meals are the best because all you do is just add water. And they can reconstitute whether cold or hot. So if you don't have the ability to cook, or let's just say it's like a, worst case scenario, an asteroid is hit and we're back to year zero. And there's, 40 to 50 days in, people are going to be really, really, really hungry where they're willing to. We've seen this in war. You saw this in, like Stalingrad, where guys were, there was no rats in the city because they ate all the rats.
Yeah.
They were resorting to cannibalism. They were peeling. This is horrific to talk about, but, we have to talk about it. They were peeling, wallpaper off the walls to boil it and try to get the collagen. The collagen protein was glue at the time. So they were trying to get, they were starving. They were so desperate for food. So, you have an event that shuts, that takes us back to year zero, where, 40 to 50 days in, people are going to be very desperate. So you may not want to cook. You may not want to cook food because the odors will attract undue attention. So stuff like that, but freeze-dried food is probably the best. I have beans and rice. Full disclosure, I have lots of beans and rice. I don't have a lot of freeze-dried food. I should have more, but we have lots of, but that's, to boil beans, like watching my grandmother cook beans at, 3 to 4 hours on the stove, right? If you're lucky, like an Instant Pot, it's 20 minutes, but do you have enough water and energy and power to run, a heating element for 4 hours? That's a lot of energy. It's a lot of BTUs.
Yeah.
So people get food that's hard to cook, or it takes forever to cook. So that's a problem. People rely on refrigeration. For all my food preps, it's all dry foods and canned goods. That's all it is. If my refrigerator dies, and we're going to be doing this research next, is what happens if your refrigerator and your freezer die? What do you do? We're working on that. What I personally do, I would slice the meat real thin and just turn it into jerky really fast is what I would do. So that's my plan. A lot of people just throw all the meat out, but that's what I would do. Forget about basic spices. Salt, pepper, curry, great. You should have all that. I've made some pretty bad game meat. Just like I hunt, I've shot some animals that there's nothing wrong with the meat. I just didn't like the way it tasted. So just making up a simple curry was great. Yeah. And it was great. So, not labeling food. You should definitely label your food, not rotating your food, or not having the means to cook food in the long run. Maybe you can correct me, but I've read that, in Europe and in England, and there's always been kind of a shortage of wood, so people burn peat.
Traditionally, yes.
Yeah, thinking of those natural food source or those natural heat sources. Like when the gas is off, like what are you going to cook with?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the are you going to store wood? Are you going to have coal? Are you going to it's
Yeah.
or even like if one area where I want to study is methane. How do I generate methane from just like my compost pile in my garden and trap that and then cook with that? And a lot of I hate using the word the third world, but a lot of poor countries, you'll see them. They're using methane to, they have like a community place where everybody defecates into, and then they tap the methane from that. And you can get a small little methane stove. It burns, I think, like a clear white flame. But yeah, you can cook with that. So so that like, right there, that's applicable to to my situation because I have a septic tank. So it's like, okay, how do I safely tap the methane out of that tank? Worst case, and cook with it if our propane goes down or the grid goes down. So it's not having the means to cook food in the long run. That's something people get hung up on. So
what about bug out or go bags? I mean, I'm gathering this is something that you basically have ready packed. So if you have an emergency such as there's a fire coming towards you or flooding and you've got to get out of your home and you've got to basically have enough to survive till you get wherever you're going. What is your recommendations on that? Obviously, other than make sure you can carry the bug out bag and it's not got so much stuff in it. Yeah.
So we have a great article on this. This is like this is a week's worth of content if we were to just discuss this. But we have a great article, and we've broken it down into 3 levels. So like a level 1 bag is less than 20 pounds. A level 2 bag is less than 35, and a level 3 is less than 45. And we talk about, like a level 1 bag is the priorities you should have: a first aid kit, a canteen with water, a collapsible canteen, a water filter, water purification tablets, food that's ready to eat, lighters, tinder, headlamps, a field knife, a multi-tool, cordage, tarp, and there's 20 things on this list here. Simple stuff like nail clippers, toilet paper, camp soap, cash, clothing. So we go into that, and then as you go to a level 2 bag, we talk about nice additions, and then when you go to a level 3 bag, it's even more gear that includes tents and a bivvy or sleeping, stuff like that. We'll just talk about like general strategy when it comes to, get home bags. So let's just say, I had a get home bag when I work from home now, especially due to COVID. I work from my home up here in the mountains, but before this, I worked as an analyst in the healthcare industry, and I worked in the city, which is the other side of the mountain range. So if an event like an EMP happened where my car was disabled, and when it comes to EMPs, people worry about like rogue states. That's impossible, or they worry about other countries doing it to us. That's unless we were like actively at war with the country, we're not going to EMP infrastructure. Like we're just not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense unless you're actively invading a country, you're trying to take it over. There's no reason. So the EMP stuff that I worried about was like a gamma ray burst in the sun. That's what I worry about. But say my car was disabled, I'm walking home because my spouse is here, my daughter's here, and it's going to be a 20-mile hike over a mountain range. So my bag was light because it's like, okay, what do you absolutely need to cross that mountain? You're going to need good shoes. You're going to need good clothes. You're going to need, hypothermia is going to kill me before lack of water and, lack of food. So do I have the right layers? Stuff like that. Firearms, stuff like that was very low priority. It's just, how do I get home? So that was in my get home bag, and I had 4,000 calories of food because that's enough to keep me going. And I had a first aid kit and water filter, and I had a map of like all the possible water sources once I got into the mountains. So that's kind of what I had in my get home bag. I don't personally have a bug out bag because where I'm at, there's just, we're next to the national forest, but the fire is going to be on the other side.
Yeah.
I don't really worry about that. If that happens, we are just going to bug out to the farm, and we have everything we need there. So we're literally just getting in the car and going. Yeah. Because we have a farm about an hour south of here, and then we also have a ranch 2 hours south of here. So I'm just going to one of those locations. So we just need the basic kit, and we're going. Now, if you do live in like California, or you live in a place where there's a lot of Colorado, or you live in the southeast where there's hurricanes and wildfires, or whatever whatever your threat is, you're going to have to leave. I guess the one strategy is you should be packed and ready to go at all times. If you get home and they're telling people to evacuate, and you are, you're tearing apart your closet, your adventure closet, trying to get all your gear and all your food, and you're tearing apart your garage looking for all your gear, you're going to be one of the last people on a major thoroughfare like a freeway or a road. So you're going to be stuck in traffic. If you're just ready to go, you just throw your bag on and go, or you just throw your bag in your vehicle and go, you're already ahead of the power curve. Yeah. So when it comes to our website, we have a lot of lists about like what you need in your bug out bags, your go bags, your get home bags, and how to store this stuff. And, we have a whole thing on vehicles and mobility with vehicles. But the biggest thing is just be ready to go.
Yeah.
To be packed up and ready to go. And one thing we strongly discourage is, like, there's a lot of overlap between like my hunting gear, my fishing gear, my survival, run around the woods for a few days, and then my bags, a bug out type bag. You shouldn't poach from your bags. It should just be a bag that's just ready to go right now.
Yeah.
So that's probably the main takeaway when it comes to bug out bags, is have it ready to go at a moment's notice versus having to go home and pack and then go because it may be too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, time is life, if you will. If you can get out and get away, your chances of survival and success are higher. If you're stuck, at home when you needed to evacuate, 2 hours ago, you're in for a tough go. So
any other, as you say, it's a huge topic and we've only got a limited amount of time, but any other sort of advice or suggestions, sort of takeaways you can give?
For a bug out bag
or just generally other things. I mean, as you said, it's an enormous topic, but any things that you're thinking you haven't asked about X or something, or
let's see here. It all kind of goes back to food and water and being able to thermoregulate. So, when I'm assembling a kit or a bag, I'm always thinking, okay, how am I going to feed myself? How am I going to keep myself hydrated? How am I going to purify water if necessary? How am I going to start fire?
Yeah.
And how am I going to keep the rain off me or the snow off me if necessary? So that really, that translates from the home, obviously, into the field.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of goes back to the mindset. A lot of survival is just mindset. So it's like, okay, what are the concepts that I need to keep alive or stay alive?
Just then, one final question. What attracted you personally to writing about this subject, given your previous career? Was there some experience in your youth or something, or have you had personal experience of it, or was it just one of those things that you saw it and thought, I can see this is the future and this is something I'm interested in? What got you going?
It's a few things, really. It's definitely upbringing. It's New Mexico. It became a state in like early 1900s, like 1912, I should know that. I'm a bad New Mexican. 1912, 1914. But it was very isolated until World War II. World War II really opened New Mexico up, and that was because they were doing all the atomic bomb research here, and it was a major thoroughfare going east and west, north and south. So everything kind of passed through New Mexico. And but this place was really isolated. So my grandmothers and great grandmother, they lived off the land. They had farms and little ranches and homesteads, and that's just how they lived. I mean, what we call, which concepts that are so foreign to us was so natural to them. Like my grandma collected rainwater. She grew all her own food. If she couldn't make it, she'd trade or barter for it. She had, actually, when the Great Depression hit, New Mexico was hit, but not that bad. Like my great grandmother had a big farm in the central part of the state, and there was lots of young, like a lot of young broke men who had nowhere to go, and they would just show up at her ranch or her farm, and she'd assign them a task all day, and then she'd feed them, and she did that for years. Right. So the concept of storing water, of growing your own food, of having a garden, of animal husbandry, that's not that foreign. I don't think we're that removed from it here for certain New Mexicans. That's just kind of how it was 50 years ago. And, a lot of us, we still have the old ranches and farms, and we still go to the old homesteads, and it's like, okay, this is where they would do this. This is where they would render the pigs. They'd kill a pig. They'd render all the lard.
Yep.
They would store the lard in this root cellar, and you had a year or two worth of fat before it turned rancid. But by that time, you've already killed 2 or 3 more pigs.
Yeah.
So it's kind of how I grew up. It's not that foreign of a concept. Now, I constantly worry about stuff that, like, it's not to the point where it gives me anxiety, but I have a family. I like living.
Yeah.
I like the human experience. I want to live as long as I can. And a lot of that's just stacking the odds in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with preparedness. There's, like a Timbora type, we know it's happened. It's going to happen again. It's not a surprise. So, having a year's worth of food is not a bad idea. It's preparing for, and I've always been fascinated by redundancy. Growing up as a child, it's like, well, what if that fails? Then what do we do? Okay, what if that fails? Then what do we do? And what if that fails? Then what do we do?
Yeah.
And so I just naturally took to prepping. As far as passionate about it was, I'm an avid fly fisherman and outdoorsman, and I love running over the Rocky Mountains here in New Mexico and in Colorado, and just getting lost for a week and privation and kind of living off the land and using maps to navigate and hunting. And so there's definitely a lot of overlap between, bugging at home and preparedness and, purifying water versus purifying water in some mountain creek up in the middle of Colorado. Mm-hmm. So the skill sets that you learn doing that easily translate into being prepared at home. So it was kind of natural jumping into, working for the prepared as a researcher and a writer. It was easy. So, being an analyst in the healthcare industry, here's the problem, fix it. Okay. So you have to have an expeditionary mindset, and you fix it, and you use the resources available and you fix it. So researching these topics is pretty straightforward. What's cool is if we have a deficiency in our knowledge, then we just find the best in the world and we ask them, hey, what would you do here? So it's pretty cool. But,
that's brilliant.
Yeah. Do you, are you a prepper? Do you prep or?
We do it in a very small scale just because we notice of shortages and things. So we do live in a rural area, but we're not that far from civilization. But we did start last year setting up vegetable gardens and things of that nature, and getting in, as you say, the dry food and the canned goods and things like that. And, we've got the generator and we've got the gas bottles and we've got various backups. So just to make life a little bit easier.
The prepping, a lot of, I guess, the old guard preppers, if you will, they, the ones that have kind of been stigmatized as kind of the crazies that are living in a bunker. Yeah. If you really want to survive, you have to collaborate with your community and your neighbors. We really haven't touched on like the defense aspect or firearms, but it's something to note that there will be some bad actors. If something happens, you will have, I would safely say about 10% of the population that's going to be desperate, and they're going to take. I mean, I know people that have said, "Oh, you're a prepper. I'm just going to shoot you and take your stuff."
Yeah.
But that's the minority. But you assume that 10% of the population is walking around and they're either a sociopathic or a psychopath. But we'll just take if we'll take whatever they want. But I think those people are going to get weeded out pretty quickly. Nobody likes a bully. But I think that if you want to survive, collaborate with your community, get to know your neighbors, work with your neighbors, ask them. Prepping used to be I don't know why it was ever taboo to me. And maybe in my part of the world, it never really was. And granted, you knew that the one ultra right wing guy who's living out in the woods by himself, and he's xenophobic and But the majority of people are just like, this is just general preparedness because things will fail. Everything fails. Systems fail. Government collapses. But it's nice to see it going mainstream now.
Yeah,
but
it is.
But collaborating with your neighbors, getting to know your community, share. I mean, this is like the Prepared. We have a great forum on the website for people to go and discuss prepping, and we moderate it. It's apolitical. The bullies are kicked out. But it's a safe place for prepping. And I'm thrilled that this is now mainstream because, growing up, I just assumed everybody did this. But when I got in the real world, nobody does it. And nobody has, most people don't even have like stored water in their home, or maybe they have, a dry box of macaroni, but they don't have the means to cook it. So I'm glad to see that there's a greater awareness for this topic.
Well, Thomas, thank you ever so much for your time.
Yes, sir.
It's been great talking to you, and good luck with the website, and stay well.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
England, home to zombies, werewolves, green-skinned fairy folk? And how about dragons, strange monoliths and vampires? If you're fascinated by the bizarre and unexplained, join Charles on a road trip around the newly discovered walled Newton Triangle, where fact is much weirder than any fiction. Check out Charles Christian's fantastic Kindle book, A Travel Guide to Yorkshire's Weird Wolds, on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com.
We're almost out of time again, but before we go, I was mindlessly surfing the interwebs the other day when I came across a reference to Poe's law. That's Nathan Poe, not Edgar Allan Poe. The law was formulated in around 2005, actually on an internet forum about religion, when Poe commented that without a clear indicator of the author's intent, such as a winking smiley or other display of humour, it's impossible to create a parody of extreme views so obviously exaggerated that it would not be taken seriously by some readers as a sincere expression of the views being parodied. This echoes the advice given by Jerry Schwartz on a Usenet forum as long ago as 1983 that you should always avoid sarcasm and facetious remarks online, as without the voice inflection and body language of face-to-face communications, these are easily misinterpreted. Now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you for listening in, and if you are hearing this show on YouTube, it'd be great if you could like the show and subscribe. Otherwise, please join me again next week. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.